Clint Eastwood walked onto John Wayne's set uninvited, and what happened next surprised everyone on that soundstage, revealing the real relationship between Hollywood's two greatest Western legends. At Warner Brothers Studio Soundstage 16 in August 1973, John Wayne was shooting his latest Western, Cahill U.S. Marshal. It was a closed set with no visitors, no press, and no exceptions. Wayne ran his sets like a military operation. At 66 years old, having made movies for over 40 years, he did things his way. When the Duke said no visitors, there were no visitors. The security guards, the crew, and everyone in Hollywood understood this rule. Then Clint Eastwood walked through the door without any announcement, invitation, or permission. Just Clint, 43 years old, fresh off High Plains Drifter, and the biggest Western star of the new generation, walking onto John Wayne's closed set as if he owned the place. The security guard attempted to stop him, but Clint kept walking without even slowing down. The crew froze. Cameras stopped rolling. 70 people held their breath waiting for the explosion, because everyone knew John Wayne hated Clint Eastwood. Wayne had said it publicly, calling Clint's spaghetti westerns un-American. He said the man with no name was a villain, not a hero, and that Clint was destroying everything the Western stood for. Now, Clint was walking across that soundstage, heading straight for the Duke. John Wayne turned around, saw who it was, and his face went hard. What happened in the next few minutes would become the most legendary confrontation in Hollywood Western history. To understand the significance of this moment, you need to grasp what John Wayne and Clint Eastwood represented in 1973. They embodied two completely different visions of America, two completely different ideas of what a Western hero should be, and two completely different generations. John Wayne was the old guard, the Duke, the symbol of American masculinity for an entire generation. He'd been making Westerns since the 1930s, including Stagecoach, Red River, The Searchers, and True Grit. His cowboys were noble and honorable. They fought for justice, protected the innocent, and represented everything good about the American frontier. Wayne's Westerns were moral stories where the good guys wore white hats, the bad guys got what they deserved, America was righteous, and American heroes were righteous too. Then Clint Eastwood came along and blew it all up. The man with no name wasn't noble, he was mercenary. He killed for money, played both sides, and walked away from towns he'd destroyed without looking back. He didn't represent American righteousness, but rather American violence, the dark side of the frontier that Wayne's Westerns had always ignored. Wayne hated it publicly and loudly. In a 1971 Playboy magazine interview, Wayne tore into Clint's films, calling them un-American. He said they glorified violence without consequence, and that Clint's characters were villains pretending to be heroes. The quote that got the most attention was, "I don't like what Eastwood is doing to the Western. He's making pictures where the weights are wrong, where the killers are the heroes, and the heroes are nowhere to be found. That's not America. That's not what we fought for." Wayne even sent Clint a personal letter asking him to stop making the kind of Westerns he was making, asking him to consider what his films were doing to the genre, to America, and to the values Wayne had spent his whole career defending. Clint never responded, not because he was afraid, not because he agreed, but because Clint didn't engage in public feuds, didn't write angry letters, and didn't defend himself in the press. He just kept making movies his way, which made it even more shocking when Clint walked onto Wayne's set in August 1973. John Wayne stood up from his director's chair. He was a big man at 6'4", even at 66. Even after the lung cancer that had taken part of his lung in 1964, he was imposing. He filled a room just by standing in it. Clint was the same height, lean where Wayne was broad, still where Wayne was commanding. Two giants faced each other across a soundstage with 70 crew members watching like spectators at a gunfight. Wayne spoke first in that famous voice, low and dangerous. "This is a closed set, Eastwood." Clint stopped 10 feet away from Wayne, close enough to talk, far enough to move. "I know, that's why I came." Wayne's eyes narrowed. "You got something to say to me?" "I got something to give you." Clint reached into his jacket. The crew tensed. A few people actually stepped back as if they expected Clint to pull out a gun, like this was one of his movies and violence was about to erupt. Instead, Clint pulled out a bottle of top-shelf tequila, the expensive kind Wayne was known to drink. Clint held it out. "I read your letter, the one you sent me 2 years ago. I didn't respond because I didn't know what to say, but I've been thinking about it and I wanted to tell you something in person." Wayne didn't take the bottle, just stared at Clint, waiting. Clint continued, "You're right. We make different kinds of Westerns. You make yours, I make mine, and we're probably never going to agree on which one is better. But here's what I came to say. Clint paused, making sure Wayne was listening. I wouldn't be making any westerns if it weren't for you. I grew up watching your movies, Stagecoach, Red River, The Searchers. You're the reason I wanted to be in this business. You're the reason I wanted to make westerns. Everything I do, even the stuff you hate, it comes from what you built. So I came here to say thank you and to give you this. He held out the bottle again. The soundstage was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. John Wayne looked at the bottle, looked at Clint, then looked at the bottle again. Then the Duke did something nobody expected. He laughed. It wasn't a small laugh. It was a full, deep belly laugh. The kind that Wayne was famous for in his lighter roles. The kind that said he was genuinely amused, genuinely surprised, genuinely disarmed. He reached out and took the bottle from Clint's hand. You got some balls, Eastwood, walking onto my set like this. Anyone else, I'd have thrown them out on their ass. I know. That's why I did it in person. Figured you'd respect the direct approach. Wayne studied Clint for a long moment. The anger was gone from his face. In its place was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or respect. You really grew up watching my pictures? Everyone I could get into. Oakland didn't have a lot of movie theaters, but the ones we had played your films constantly. I must have seen Stagecoach a dozen times. Wayne grunted. That's a good picture. Ford's best, maybe. It's why I wanted to make westerns. The whole genre, the landscape, the mythology. The idea of a man alone against the wilderness. That came from watching you. Wayne was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised everyone listening. I've seen your pictures too, you know. Clint raised an eyebrow. Wayne's voice was blunt, but not hostile as he continued. And I don't like them. They're too dark, too violent. The hero isn't heroic enough for my taste. But he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But I can see you know what you're doing. You're not making bad pictures. You're making different pictures. And maybe that's not the same thing. Coming from John Wayne, that was practically a glowing review. Clint nodded. That's all I needed to hear. Wayne looked at the bottle of tequila in his hand, then back at Clint. You drink tequila? When the occasion calls for it. Wayne turned to his assistant. Get 2 glasses. Then he looked at the crew. Take 15, everybody. Mr. Eastwood and I are going to have a conversation. The crew scattered. Within a minute, the soundstage was empty except for 2 men, 2 chairs, and a bottle of tequila. Nobody knows exactly what John Wayne and Clint Eastwood talked about for the next hour. The set was cleared, with no witnesses and no recordings, just 2 Western legends, alone with a bottle of tequila and 40 years of shared history with the genre they both loved. But people noticed things afterward. They noticed that when the crew came back, both men were laughing, not politely, but genuinely. Like old friends who just remembered why they liked each other. They noticed that Wayne walked Clint to the door personally, shook his hand, and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. They noticed that Clint turned back at the door, nodded once, and said, I'll remember that, Duke. And they noticed that after Clint left, John Wayne was in the best mood anyone had seen in months. The rest of the shoot went smooth. Wayne was patient with the crew and generous with the other actors. Whatever had happened in that conversation had changed something in him. Years later, people close to both men pieced together fragments of what was discussed. They talked about the Western as a genre, about what it meant to America, and about why it mattered. Wayne argued for the traditional approach. Heroes who represented American values, stories that affirmed the rightness of civilization over savagery. He believed Westerns should inspire people and show them the best version of themselves. Clint argued for something different. He said Westerns should tell the truth, even when the truth was ugly, that the real West was violent and morally complicated, full of men who weren't heroes or villains, but something in between. He believed Westerns should challenge people and show them the world as it actually was. Neither man convinced the other. They never would. But somewhere in that conversation, they found respect. Wayne reportedly said, You're not trying to destroy the Western, you're trying to evolve it. I don't like your version, but I understand why you're making it. And Clint reportedly said, Your version will always matter. It's the foundation. Without you, there's nothing for me to build on or tear down. That last part made Wayne laugh. Tear down. You got some nerve, kid. But he was smiling when he said it. After that day, John Wayne never publicly criticized Clint Eastwood again. Not once. For the remaining 6 years of his life, Wayne was asked about Clint constantly. Interviewers wanted the feud, wanted the conflict, wanted the old lion to attack the young one. Wayne refused. When asked about Clint's Westerns, he'd say, We make different pictures. That's all. When pressed about whether he still thought Clint's films were un-American, he'd say, I said what I said, but a man can change his perspective on things. The closest he came to explaining what had changed was in a 1976 interview, 3 years before his death. A reporter asked, You and Clint Eastwood seem to have buried the hatchet. What happened? Wayne smiled with that crooked, weathered smile that had launched 1,000 movies. He came to see me on his own, uninvited, walked right onto my set like he owned the place. And you know what? That took guts. I respect guts. Always have. We talked, found out we don't agree on much, but we agree on one thing. The Western matters. It's the American mythology. It's how we tell ourselves who we are. Clint and I just tell different parts of the story. His part is darker than mine, but it's still part of the story. The reporter pressed. So, you're friends now? Wayne shook his head. I wouldn't say friends. We're too different for that, but there's respect. And in this business, respect is worth more than friendship. Friendship fades, respect lasts. John Wayne died on June 11th, 1979, from stomach cancer. He was 72 years old. Clint Eastwood was at the memorial service. He sat in the back, didn't speak to the press, and didn't make a statement. But people noticed that he stayed until the end, long after most of the celebrities had left, long after the cameras had stopped rolling. He just sat there alone, paying his respects to the man who'd inspired him, fought with him, and ultimately respected him. The old guard and the new, the traditional Western and the revisionist Western. Two visions of America that never agreed but somehow learned to coexist. In 1992, 13 years after John Wayne's death, Clint Eastwood released Unforgiven. It was a Western, a dark Western, the darkest Western ever made, some critics said. A film about an aging gunfighter who comes out of retirement for one last job, confronts the violence of his past, and discovers that there are no heroes, only survivors. It was everything John Wayne had criticized about Clint's films. The weights were wrong. The hero wasn't heroic. The violence had consequences that lingered long after the credits rolled. And yet, Clint dedicated the film to two people. The first was Sergio Leone, who had died in 1989, the director who had created The Man with No Name, who had launched Clint's career, who had taught him everything about visual storytelling. The second was Don Siegel, who had directed Clint in Dirty Harry and 5 other films, his American mentor, the man who had shown him how to apply Leone's lessons to Hollywood. But people who knew Clint said there was a third dedication, one that wasn't on the screen, one that Clint kept to himself. They said Unforgiven was in some ways Clint's answer to John Wayne. Not a rejection, not a repudiation, but an answer, a completion. Wayne had spent his career showing the Western myth at its brightest. The noble hero, the righteous cause, the triumph of civilization. Clint spent his career showing the Western myth at its darkest. The mercenary anti-hero, the moral ambiguity, the cost of violence. Unforgiven brought both visions together. It acknowledged the Wayne myth, the idea of the heroic gunfighter, and then showed what happened when that myth faded, when the hero grew old, when the violence caught up with him, when the legend had to face the truth. In the film's final scene, Clint's character rides out of town, disappearing into the darkness. It's the opposite of a Wayne ending. No triumph, no justice. Just a man fading into the night with blood on his hands. But it's also, in its own way, a tribute, because the character carries the weight of the Wayne mythology with him. The film only works because we remember what Westerns used to be and what heroes used to mean. Unforgiven won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. It was the culmination of Clint's career, the film that proved he wasn't just a movie star, he was an artist. And somewhere in that film, in that dark meditation on violence and mythology and the cost of being a legend, was a conversation that started on a soundstage in 1973. 2 men, 2 visions, 1 bottle of tequila, and a respect that lasted longer than either of their careers. Here's what that uninvited visit to John Wayne's set really teaches us. Disagreement isn't the same as disrespect. You can think someone is wrong, fundamentally, philosophically wrong, and still honor what they've built, still acknowledge their contribution, and still learn from them. Clint Eastwood didn't agree with John Wayne about anything important. Not about Westerns, not about America, not about what heroes should look like or what stories should say. But he respected Wayne, respected what Wayne had built, and respected the foundation that made his own work possible. And he had the courage to say so in person, uninvited, on a closed set where he wasn't welcome. That's what changed Wayne's mind. Not the words, but the act. The willingness to show up face to face and deliver respect directly. Wayne had spent years criticizing Clint from a distance through interviews, letters, and intermediaries. Clint responded by walking onto Wayne's set with a bottle of tequila and saying, "I disagree with you, but I learn from you and I respect you." That's how you end a feud. Not by surrendering, not by agreeing, but by showing up. Clint Eastwood walked onto John Wayne's set, Uninvited. What happened next surprised everyone. Two enemies became something like allies. Two visions of America found common ground. Two legends discovered that respect is worth more than agreement. In the Western genre, the great American mythology was richer for having both of them.